Clara Thompson sat alone in her cozy living room, the soft glow of the television screen casting faint shadows on her wrinkled face. It was an ordinary evening in the small suburban town of Asheville, North Carolina. The house felt quiet, too quiet. Her children had long since moved away, and her husband John had passed 3 years ago after a long battle with cancer. She had tried to fill the empty spaces with books, knitting, and gardening, but nothing seemed to quell the loneliness that weighed on her heart. Clara wasn't one to complain. She was a woman of stoic resilience, having survived countless hardships in her 65 years. But as the days turned into months and the months into years, she couldn't deny that something was missing. She had never imagined she would be living out her golden years in solitude. It was during one of those quiet nights that she stumbled upon the website. It was late, after dinner, when Clara found herself browsing the internet, something she hadn't done often. The computer, a relic from the early 2000s, sat in the corner of her living room, gathering dust. But tonight, something about the stillness of the house urged her to log on. She clicked on the screen and typed in the address of a dating website she had heard about on a morning talk show, Silver Singles. It was marketed for older adults, people in their 50s and beyond, looking for love or companionship. Clara hesitated for a moment before creating a profile. She wasn't sure what to expect. She'd never been keen on online dating, and at her age it felt somewhat absurd. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this could be her way to connect with someone again. Clara entered her details, her age, her hobbies, and the fact that she had recently retired from her job as a librarian. She carefully selected a picture of herself from a family reunion a few years prior. She looked pleasant, wearing a soft smile, her silver hair neatly styled in a short bob. She didn't look like the type of woman who was actively seeking romance at her age, but she had nothing to lose. After uploading the picture and completing her profile, Clara clicked Search and waited. She wasn't sure what she was hoping for. Maybe a nice man who liked the same books as she did, or someone who would enjoy quiet afternoons in the garden. But what came next surprised her. That very same evening, Clara received a message. The notification popped up on her screen like an unexpected gift. "Hey there, I saw your profile. You seem really interesting. I'm Lucas, 20 years old. I'd love to talk more." Clara blinked at the message in disbelief. 20 years old? She read it again. Lucas was young, barely more than a boy, yet his message felt oddly respectful, sincere even. He complimented her profile in a way that didn't feel like a typical pickup line. There was no mention of her age, no awkward comments about her being older. He simply expressed an interest in talking. After a few moments of contemplation, Clara typed a reply, unsure of what to expect. She wasn't interested in something fleeting or a young man seeking only to pass the time. But Lucas didn't strike her as the typical boy seeking attention from older women. His words were thoughtful, and his message was kind. "Hello, Lucas. Thank you for the message. I'm Clara. I'm glad you reached out. What do you like to do in your free time?" She hit send, unsure of what kind of conversation she was starting, but willing to see where it might lead. The reply came quickly. "I love reading, hiking, and listening to music, but mostly I enjoy talking to people who are a bit older. I think I learn more that way. You have so much experience in life, and I find that really interesting." Clara was taken aback by his openness. She'd always believed that older people like herself could offer a unique perspective, but no one had ever put it that way. A small warmth stirred inside her as she realized how different Lucas seemed from others. Most people, especially young men, saw her as just an elderly woman, a relic of the past. But Lucas seemed to genuinely value her experiences. Their conversation stretched into the night. They shared stories of their lives. Clara told him about her years as a librarian, the joys and challenges of raising her children, and the quiet grief she felt since John's death. Lucas, in turn, spoke about his passions for literature, the troubles he faced growing up without a father, and his desire to learn from people who had lived long enough to understand life's complexities. As the days turned into weeks, their conversations deepened. Clara found herself looking forward to hearing from Lucas, eager for the warmth of his words. They spoke every day, sometimes multiple times a day. He was thoughtful, patient, and never once mentioned her age in an awkward or uncomfortable way. In fact, Lucas seemed to appreciate her wisdom. He often asked for her advice on matters of the heart, even though he was just beginning to navigate his own life. Despite the age difference, Clara felt a connection she hadn't felt in years. Lucas made her feel young again. He was sweet, and his attention made her feel special in a way that was completely new. She found herself laughing at his jokes and sharing parts of her life that she hadn't thought about in years. There was a part of Clara that had always longed for romance, but she never expected to find it at this stage in her life, especially not with someone so young. But something about Lucas felt right. He told her things that made her heart flutter, things she hadn't heard since the early days with her late husband. "You have the most beautiful soul," he'd told her in one of their late-night chats. "I admire your strength and your kindness. It's rare to find someone like you." As the weeks wore on, Clara started to wonder if perhaps there was something more to this connection. Was this the love she had missed out on? Could a 20-year-old really fall in love with someone like her, someone who was decades older? And yet, as their bond grew stronger, Clara felt a small seed of doubt take root in her mind. Why would Lucas, so young and full of life, want someone like her? Was she just a distraction for him, a temporary escape from the reality of his own life? Or could he really be genuine in his affection? Despite the lingering questions, Clara pushed them aside. Lucas had never given her any reason to doubt him. He was everything she had been missing, someone who listened, who cared, and who made her feel valued. She decided to put her concerns behind her and embrace the joy of their connection. One evening, after another long conversation, Lucas made a suggestion that took Clara by surprise. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "What if we met in person? I'd love to spend some time with you, see you face to face. What do you think?" Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined meeting Lucas in person, and yet the idea filled her with excitement. The possibility of seeing him, touching him, being with him in a way that wasn't mediated by a computer screen felt intoxicating. "I think I'd like that," Clara replied, her voice a little shaky but full of excitement. "Where would we meet? I'll fly you down here to Florida. We could spend a few days together. What do you say?" The thought of it sent waves of anticipation through Clara's body. She had never traveled far from home in her life. The idea of flying to Florida, of seeing Lucas in person, was both thrilling and terrifying. But she couldn't deny the pull of his words. She wanted to see him. She needed to see him. "I'll book the flight," Clara said, her voice now steady with determination. For the first time in years, Clara felt alive. She felt as though she was on the brink of something extraordinary. What she didn't know was that this trip would change her life forever. Clara Thompson's excitement had barely allowed her to sleep the night before her flight to Florida. The morning of her departure, she felt a strange mixture of thrill and anxiety as she packed her suitcase, making sure to include a nice dress, some comfortable shoes, and the little toiletries she might need for the weekend. She wasn't the kind of woman who spent a lot of time on fashion, but the thought of meeting Lucas in person stirred a part of her that had been dormant for years. She wanted to look nice, to feel good about herself. Her children had been concerned when she told them she was going to Florida, but Clara reassured them. It was just a short trip, she said, a chance to meet a new friend, someone she had been talking to for months. Her son Derek had raised an eyebrow but hadn't pressed the matter. Her daughter Laura had been a little more vocal in her concerns, asking if Clara was sure about meeting someone she had only known online. Clara had assured them both that everything would be fine. After all, she was an intelligent woman, and she wouldn't make such a big decision without thinking it through carefully. "Mom, just be careful," Laura had said, giving her a hug before she left. "You've never met this guy. I know you want to be happy, but don't be too trusting." Clara had smiled a little wistfully. "I know, sweetie, but it's time for me to have some fun. I'm not a child." Now sitting in the airport terminal, Clara felt a flutter of nerves deep in her stomach. She had never been on a plane by herself before. She had always been the one to accompany her children on family vacations, and the thought of traveling alone made her feel strangely small. But Lucas's messages kept playing in her mind, his kind words, his sweet voice during their phone calls, and they comforted her. He had been nothing but patient and understanding. He had even told her that he admired her for being so brave at her age, for not letting loneliness control her life. "You're beautiful, Clara," he had said during one of their last calls. "You deserve to be loved, and I'm going to make sure you are." That was the last thing he said before she boarded the plane, and his words filled her with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The flight itself was uneventful, and Clara passed the time by reading a book and staring out the window, watching the clouds drift by. When the plane finally descended into Miami, Clara felt a rush of excitement, but also a growing unease. This was real. She was here, thousands of miles from home, about to meet a man she had only known through a screen. The thought was a little overwhelming, but the closer she got to her destination, the more the excitement overtook the doubt. She grabbed her suitcase from the luggage carousel and made her way toward the arrivals gate. The airport was busy, the hum of voices and the constant shuffle of people filling the air. Clara scanned the crowd, hoping to catch a glimpse of Lucas. She had only seen him in pictures and on video calls, so she wasn't entirely sure what to expect. But she had a feeling she would know him as soon as she saw him. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "I'm here, Clara. I'll be waiting by the gate." Clara smiled at the text. Her heart skipped a beat as she scanned the area once more. And then she saw him. A tall, lean figure stood near the edge of the crowd. His shaggy brown hair fell just above his eyebrows, and he wore a casual but stylish jacket. He stood out among the other travelers, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for her. Clara's pulse quickened. "Lucas!" she called out, her voice a little nervous but filled with warmth. His eyes locked onto hers immediately, and a wide smile spread across his face. He waved and Clara's heart fluttered. He looked just like his pictures, maybe even better. As he walked toward her, she felt a strange sense of recognition, as if they had known each other for far longer than just a few months. "Clara, it's really you," Lucas said, his voice full of excitement. He reached her and pulled her into a tight hug, and for a moment, Clara felt her nervousness dissolve. His embrace was warm and genuine. She felt his body against hers, the firmness of his chest and the scent of his cologne. He smelled fresh and clean, and she felt an unexpected surge of affection for him. It felt good to be held, to feel wanted. "You look even more beautiful in person," Lucas whispered, pulling away slightly to look at her. Clara couldn't help but smile, a blush rising to her cheeks. "Thank you, Lucas. You're very handsome yourself." They stood there for a moment, both unsure of how to proceed, but the awkwardness quickly faded as Lucas took her suitcase and led her toward the exit. "I rented a car," he said, his hand gently guiding her. "I thought we could drive around, maybe see some sights before heading to the hotel." Clara nodded, her smile returning. "That sounds wonderful. I've never been to Florida before. I'm excited to see everything." The drive from the airport to the hotel was a blur of palm trees, bustling streets, and the occasional glimpse of the ocean. Clara found herself staring out the window, mesmerized by the new sights. Everything was different here. The air smelled saltier, the sky was brighter, and there was a sense of vibrancy she wasn't used to in the quiet mountain town of Asheville. As they drove, Lucas kept the conversation light, asking Clara about her life back in North Carolina. He wanted to know all about her childhood, about her family, about her career as a librarian. Clara found herself enjoying the questions, feeling the weight of her life stories coming to the surface. It was as if Lucas was genuinely interested in her, not just as an older woman, but as a person with a rich and meaningful past. They arrived at the hotel, a small, upscale boutique place that seemed out of place in the heart of Miami's bustling city center. Lucas checked them in, and Clara marveled at the modern decor and the elegant atmosphere of the lobby. "This place is lovely," Clara remarked, looking around. "I thought you'd like it," Lucas said with a grin. "I wanted to make our time together special." They made their way up to the room, and as Lucas opened the door, Clara was struck by the luxurious feel of the suite. The room was spacious with large windows that offered a view of the city below. The bed was king-sized, and the soft lighting made the room feel intimate and cozy. "Make yourself at home," Lucas said, setting Clara's suitcase down near the bed. "I'll let you get settled. Want to go out for dinner later?" Clara nodded, her smile widening. "That sounds perfect. Thank you for making everything so nice." As she unpacked, Clara's thoughts drifted back to her children. They had been so worried when she left, but now, standing in this beautiful hotel room in Miami, She felt it was as if she had shed the weight of her past and stepped into a new chapter of her life, one filled with possibility. But just as quickly, a small voice in her mind reminded her to be cautious. She didn't know Lucas as well as she thought. What if he wasn't the person he seemed to be online? What if all of this was too good to be true? She shook her head, pushing the thought aside. She couldn't let doubt overshadow the joy she felt in this moment. She had come here for a fresh start, for a chance at happiness. And with that thought, Clara smiled to herself as she walked into the bathroom to freshen up. She was ready for the evening ahead. Clara stood before the mirror in the hotel bathroom, adjusting the sleeves of her soft, pastel-colored dress. It was one of her favorites, a simple but elegant piece that made her feel both graceful and comfortable. She applied a touch of makeup, smoothing out the lines on her face with careful strokes. It wasn't that Clara was vain, but she wanted to look her best for Lucas. She wanted to feel confident, as though she were the young woman she once was, stepping out for a date. Her thoughts kept drifting to Lucas. She had been captivated by his attentiveness, his charm. He seemed so earnest in his affection, so genuine in his desire to spend time with her. She couldn't deny the warmth in her heart every time they spoke. But there were still a few lingering doubts, tiny seeds of uncertainty that she couldn't entirely dismiss. What did a man like Lucas want with someone like her? He was only 20. His life was just beginning, filled with endless possibilities and adventures. Could it be that he was just playing with her, enjoying the novelty of an older woman's attention? No, Clara thought firmly. Lucas had always seemed sincere. She would give him the benefit of the doubt. This was her chance to feel young again, to experience the excitement of a relationship. She had to trust herself. With a deep breath, Clara finished getting ready and walked out into the main part of the hotel room. Lucas was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. But as soon as he saw her, his eyes lit up. "Clara, you look stunning," he said, rising to his feet. His voice was filled with admiration, and his gaze lingered on her with an intensity that made Clara's heart race. "I'm lucky to be in your company tonight." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. His compliment was simple, but the sincerity in his voice made it feel like the most genuine praise she had ever received. "Thank you, Lucas. You look quite handsome yourself," she replied, a playful note in her voice. She hadn't expected to feel this much like a woman again, someone desired, someone special. Lucas smiled back, his eyes twinkling. "Shall we go?" Clara nodded, allowing him to take her arm as they left the hotel room and walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, Clara couldn't help but notice how close Lucas stood to her. There was an energy between them, something unspoken that hung in the air. It made her feel alive, as though her heart was skipping a beat every time he brushed against her. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped out into the bustling lobby of the hotel. Miami was alive with noise and energy, and Clara felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as Lucas led her toward the front doors. They walked together down the street, the warm Florida air brushing against her skin, mingling with the faint scent of salt from the nearby ocean. They didn't talk much on the walk, but Clara didn't mind. The comfortable silence between them spoke volumes. The way Lucas occasionally glanced at her, as though making sure she was all right, made her feel cherished in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Eventually, they arrived at the restaurant, a small, intimate bistro tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The lighting was dim, with candles flickering on each table, casting soft shadows across the room. The atmosphere was romantic, perfect for a first date, or, in Clara's case, a long overdue connection with someone she had grown to care about. A hostess greeted them and led them to a table by the window. As they sat down, Lucas pulled out Clara's chair for her, a gesture that made her heart swell with affection. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Clara said, settling into her seat. Lucas smiled, his expression sincere. "I just want you to enjoy yourself. You deserve it." They both looked over the menu, but Clara's attention kept drifting back to Lucas. She noticed how his fingers tapped lightly on the table, how his eyes seemed to constantly search hers as if trying to decipher some hidden secret. His gaze never faltered. There was a tenderness in the way he looked at her, and it stirred something deep inside Clara. The waiter, came to take their drink orders, and after a few minutes of deliberation, they both settled on wine. Lucas ordered a red, a deep Merlot, while Clara opted for something a bit lighter, a crisp Chardonnay. When the wine arrived, Lucas raised his glass with a smile. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Clara clinked her glass against his, her heart fluttering. "To new beginnings," she echoed, her voice steady but filled with a quiet excitement. As they sipped their wine, the conversation flowed easily. Lucas asked about her life back in North Carolina, about her childhood, her memories of her late husband. Clara found herself sharing stories she hadn't thought about in years. Memories of family vacations, her time spent raising children, the joy and the challenges of life as a young woman. Lucas listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, never rushing her. He seemed to hang on every word she spoke. And as Clara spoke, she realized something. Lucas wasn't just interested in her for her age or for some kind of exotic novelty. He genuinely cared about her life, about her experiences, her struggles, her triumphs. He wanted to understand her, to connect with her in a way that was rare, even among people her own age. By the time the main course arrived, Clara was feeling more at ease. The food was delicious, roast chicken for her, grilled salmon for Lucas, and they continued to chat between bites. Clara laughed at his jokes, enjoyed the warmth of his company, and marveled at how quickly the evening had passed. But even as she enjoyed their conversation, she couldn't help but feel a small twinge of unease. There were moments when Lucas seemed distant, as if he were deep in thought. Occasionally his gaze would shift, and for a fraction of a second, Clara felt a sense of unfamiliarity, something just beyond her grasp. When dessert arrived, Lucas suggested they take a walk along the beach afterward. Clara agreed, grateful for the opportunity to continue their conversation. There was something magical about walking by the ocean at night, with the sound of the waves crashing softly against the shore and the cool breeze kissing their faces. The night was warm but pleasant, the air thick with the salty scent of the sea. As they strolled along the beach, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She felt young again. The world opened before her. For the first time in a long time, she felt as though she had a future with someone who seemed to care for her deeply. But as the night wore on, Clara noticed something in Lucas's behavior that unsettled her. His steps had become more deliberate, his movements more calculated. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Clara," he said softly, "I'm so glad you came here. I've wanted this for a long time." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with affection. "Me too, Lucas. I'm so glad we finally met." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes intense, and then, without warning, he leaned in to kiss her. His lips were soft, warm, and as their kiss deepened, Clara felt a wave of emotion rush over her. She hadn't felt desired like this in years, and it was intoxicating. She closed her eyes and let herself be swept away by the moment. But then, just as quickly as it had started, Lucas pulled away. His hands were still on her shoulders, and his gaze was intense, almost too intense. Clara opened her eyes and saw something unfamiliar there, something that sent a chill down her spine. "Clara," Lucas whispered, "I'm not like other men. I've been waiting for this moment. For you." The words hung in the air, and Clara felt a flicker of unease. Something about the way he said it made her skin prickle. Was it just the intensity of the moment? Or was there something darker beneath the surface? But before she could respond, Lucas pulled her into another kiss, and Clara, lost in the sensations, allowed herself to be swept away again. The night had grown still save for the rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore. Clara and Lucas stood close, the faint moonlight casting an ethereal glow over their faces. The kiss they had shared lingered in Clara's mind, but now she couldn't help but notice something different in Lucas's eyes, something she hadn't seen before. There was a darkness there, a coldness that wasn't present before. His grip on her shoulders was firm, his touch almost possessive. Clara felt the hairs on the back of her neck prickle, as though a warning bell was going off in the back of her mind. She took a step back, trying to pull away from his hold, but Lucas's hands tightened around her arms and she froze. Lucas, she said, her voice trembling slightly. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by you've been waiting for this moment? He paused, his face unreadable for a moment, then gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I just mean that I'm really glad you came here, Clara. I want you to know how much I care about you. I'm not the type of man who just looks for fleeting connections. You and I, we have something real. Clara nodded, trying to suppress the uneasy feeling growing in her stomach. She had never thought of herself as a naive woman, but this felt different. There was something about Lucas's intensity, his gaze, that was unsettling. Was it possible she was misreading him? After all, he was still the charming, attentive young man she had spent months getting to know online. But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave her. I'm not used to all of this, Clara said softly, her voice faltering. I didn't expect things to move so fast. Lucas stepped closer again, and his touch was gentle, but there was an urgency in the way he held her. It's okay, Clara. I know it's a lot, but we've been talking for months now. I think we both know there's something special between us. Clara nodded, but a knot twisted in her stomach. Something wasn't right. She had traveled thousands of miles to meet him, and yes, she had been swept up in the romance of it all. The idea of starting something new, of feeling wanted again. But there was a dissonance she couldn't shake, something off about the way Lucas was behaving. Her instincts, honed through years of life experience, told her to be cautious, but the rational part of her brain urged her not to overthink things. She forced a smile. Maybe I just need some time to adjust. Lucas seemed to accept her response, though his eyes didn't lose their intensity. Of course, take all the time you need. I'm here for you, Clara. We'll go at your pace. I just want you to be happy. They stood there for a while, silent except for the sounds of the ocean and the occasional breeze rustling through the palm trees. Clara couldn't shake the unease. She had heard the words Lucas said, but there was an edge to his voice, a sense of urgency in his manner that made her feel as if something was pressing, something she wasn't ready for, something that she couldn't fully grasp yet. Eventually she spoke up, needing a change of pace, trying to calm her racing thoughts. How about we head back to the hotel now? I think I need to rest a bit. Lucas didn't immediately respond, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then his lips curled into a soft smile again, and he nodded. Of course. Let's go. They walked back to the hotel in silence. The air seemed heavier now, thick with unspoken words, the tension between them palpable. Clara found herself clutching her purse a little too tightly, as though it were an anchor, a tether to something familiar. Lucas, by contrast, was almost eerily calm, his steps steady and sure as they made their way back through the streets of Miami. When they reached the hotel, Lucas opened the door for her, and they stepped inside. Clara was grateful to be in the familiar space of the hotel room, but something about the way Lucas moved, his calculated actions, the deliberate way he locked the door behind them, sent another shiver down her spine. Would you like some wine? Lucas asked, his voice calm, though his eyes were sharp, watching her closely. Clara hesitated, not sure why the offer felt more like a command than a simple question. No, I think I'll just go to bed. It's been a long day. Lucas studied her for a moment, as though weighing her words. All right, Clara, but if you change your mind, I'll be here. Clara nodded, retreating toward the bathroom to wash up. She tried to calm herself, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired, her face drawn with uncertainty. The woman she saw in the mirror was older. Yes, but there was still a spark in her. Yet tonight, that spark felt dimmer. Her instincts were telling her to trust herself, to listen to the warnings in her gut. As she washed her face and dried her hands, Clara glanced at the clock. It was late, far later than she had intended to stay up. She had come to Florida with an open heart, eager to see where this new connection might lead. But now, as the quiet of the hotel room enveloped her, she felt a deep sense of disquiet. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Stepping out of the bathroom, she found Lucas sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes still fixed on her with that same intense gaze. The sight of him made her heart race, but now it was no longer with excitement. No, now it was fear. Lucas, I think I'm going to get some rest, Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. He stood up, walking slowly toward her. There was a deliberate slowness to his movements, a predatory grace that Clara couldn't ignore. Of course, Clara, you need your rest, but I just wanted to say how happy I am you're here. You're so special to me. Clara gave a small, strained smile, but something in her knew this wasn't the Lucas she had come to know online. There was a different side of him now, a side that made her feel small and vulnerable. She had felt wanted, adored even, earlier in the evening, but now standing in front of him, she felt something else entirely. She felt like prey. I'm tired, she said again, stepping back toward the bed, trying to put some distance between them. Lucas didn't move immediately, but his eyes never left her. I understand. Sleep well, Clara. I'll be here when you wake up. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she climbed into the bed, pulling the covers tightly around herself. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sensation that Lucas's gaze was still lingering on her. She lay there for what felt like hours, wide awake, heart racing, listening to the sounds of the hotel room, the quiet hum of the air conditioning, the distant noise of the city outside. But no matter how hard she tried, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had come here to start a new chapter in her life, but now she wasn't sure if she had walked into a dream or a nightmare. The question was, what was Lucas truly after? The night stretched on in suffocating silence. Clara lay in the bed, her mind whirling, unable to shake the heavy unease that had settled deep in her chest. She turned restlessly, pulling the blankets tighter around her shoulders as if the physical closeness of the fabric could somehow shield her from the thoughts racing through her mind. Every creak of the floorboards outside the room, every rustle of the wind outside her window, felt amplified. She tried to convince herself that it was just the unfamiliarity of the situation, the excitement of meeting Lucas for the first time, the newness of everything. But that explanation no longer seemed to hold up. Something felt off. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a gnawing, primal instinct telling her that she was in danger. Clara's eyes darted toward the door, wondering if Lucas was still out there in the other room, watching her. She hadn't heard him move since he'd closed the door behind him earlier. There was something disconcerting in the way he had left her alone. His calm, deliberate movements, the way he had studied her so closely, as if taking in every detail, as if he were trying to memorize her. And then there were his words. He had said he was happy she was here, that she was special to him. But something in his tone had felt off, like he was trying to convince both her and himself of something that wasn't entirely true. She took a deep breath and pushed the sheets off, deciding she needed to get out of the bed. Perhaps a glass of water would calm her nerves, or maybe walking around the room would help clear her mind. Whatever the reason, she couldn't lie still any longer. As she slid out of bed, the coolness of the hotel floor sent a chill up her spine. She moved toward the window, looking out at the city skyline, bathed in the pale glow of streetlights. Miami looked beautiful at night, alive and pulsing with energy, but Clara could hardly appreciate it. She was consumed by an overwhelming sense of isolation. Even in the midst of the city, she felt alone. Her thoughts returned to Lucas. She couldn't ignore the fact that she hadn't really known him. They had shared hundreds of messages, countless hours of video calls, but they were still strangers in the truest sense. The young man who had seemed so caring and attentive in their online conversations now felt like a ghost, a stranger wearing the face of someone she had come to trust. As Clara stood by the window staring out at the view, a strange noise caught her attention. It was faint at first, barely audible over the distant city hum, but it was enough to make her freeze. A soft scraping sound, followed by a slow creak. She turned her head sharply toward the door of the hotel room. It was subtle, but she heard it again, the unmistakable sound of someone moving on the other side. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Was Lucas out there? Had he been standing there, waiting, listening? Why hadn't he gone to bed himself? The noise stopped abruptly, leaving Clara in a tense silence. Her breath hitched in her chest as she wondered if she had imagined it. But no, she knew what she'd heard. Someone was out there. The question was, why? Her instinct screamed at her to leave, to run. But where could she go? She couldn't just flee into the night with no plan, no sense of direction. Her heart raced, her mind clouded with fear and confusion. She needed to confront whatever was happening, to face this head on. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Clara tiptoed toward the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. Slowly, cautiously, she turned the knob, pushing the door open just a crack. She peered out into the darkened hallway, her eyes straining to see anything out of the ordinary. The hallway was empty, her breath caught in her throat. There was no one there, no sign of Lucas. But then she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The door to the adjoining room was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Clara's pulse quickened as she realized it wasn't just any room. It was the room next to hers. Her mind flashed back to something Lucas had said earlier. He had mentioned he rented a car for them to use, that they would take their time and enjoy the sights. But there had been something odd about his offer, something that she hadn't fully registered at the time. Why had he mentioned this particular hotel in the first place? It was a small boutique place, expensive for a single night stay, and there was no reason he would have booked a room right next to hers unless there was some plan behind it. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She knew that her gut feeling had been right. There was something wrong. She needed to act. Stepping back from the door, she hurried to her phone on the bedside table and fumbled for her keys. Her mind raced as she thought of the options available to her. Should she call for help? But her phone had no signal, no reception, nothing that would allow her to contact anyone. She was entirely alone. Her eyes shifted back toward the door leading into the hallway. The other room, the sliver of light. Her mind raced again. Was it possible that someone else had rented the room next to hers? Was it possible that Lucas had planned this all along? The door creaked again. This time, Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed her purse and rushed to the door. She twisted the handle quickly and silently, careful not to make any noise that would alert Lucas to her movement. As she stepped into the hallway, her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, her mind spinning. She needed to find a way out of here. She moved swiftly, trying to keep low and unnoticed. But as she reached the stairs that led down to the lobby, she heard a sound that made her freeze in her tracks. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps, coming toward her, slow and deliberate. Her eyes flicked around, desperate for an escape, for a place to hide. But there was nowhere. The hallway was too narrow, the staircase too far to reach before whoever was coming would find her. Clara's heart slammed against her ribcage. It was too late. The footsteps grew louder, and as Clara turned to face the direction from which they were coming, she saw him. Lucas. But it wasn't the Lucas she had known. This man was different. His face was hard, his eyes cold and calculating. He had an unsettling smile on his lips, but there was no warmth in it. "You shouldn't have tried to run, Clara," he said, his voice low and menacing. "It was always going to end this way." Clara's blood ran cold as she realized the horrifying truth. She wasn't just here to meet a lover. She wasn't just here for some late-night romance. She was a target. Lucas stepped forward, and Clara instinctively took a step back, her mind reeling. She wasn't sure what his plan was, or how much of it had been premeditated. All she knew was that she had made a terrible mistake, and now there was no turning back. The man she had trusted, the man she thought she had known, was no longer the charming, sweet Lucas she had met online. He was a stranger, a predator, and Clara was his prey. Clara's breath came in sharp, desperate gasps as she sprinted down the hallway, the pounding of her heart almost drowning out the sound of her footsteps. Every instinct told her to keep moving, to escape, to outrun the nightmare that had just unfolded. But she knew deep down that there was no running from Lucas. He was too close, and he wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted. Her mind raced, her body aching with the strain of her flight. But the terror that coursed through her veins pushed her onward. The staircase loomed ahead, and with every step she took toward it, she felt a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could make it out of this. She had to get to the lobby. She had to get help. But before she could reach the first step, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. His footsteps. Clara froze in her tracks. She didn't dare look behind her, knowing that the moment she did, Lucas would be there, just inches away. She could already feel his presence like a shadow looming over her. She knew she couldn't outrun him. Not now. Panic surged through her. Her mind screamed at her to move, but her legs felt like lead. She turned, her eyes frantically searching for another way out, another path, but there was nothing. The hallway was too narrow, the walls too close. There was no escape here. Clara? The sound of Lucas's voice sent a chill down her spine. His tone was almost tender, as if he were speaking to her as one might speak to a pet or a child. It was sickening. "Don't do this," Clara pleaded, her voice trembling. "Please, just let me go. I don't know what you want, but whatever it is, I can't help you. I'm not part of your plan." Lucas chuckled softly, the sound echoing off the walls. It was a chilling, hollow sound, one that made Clara's skin crawl. "You really think you can talk your way out of this?" he asked, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "You've already made the mistake of trusting me. And now—" He paused, his eyes narrowing as he took a slow step forward. "Now it's too late." Clara's mind raced. She had to do something, anything. She couldn't just stand there and let him close in on her. Her heart was hammering, and her hands were slick with sweat. But she wasn't going down without a fight. She had fought too hard in life to let this nightmare consume her. Her eyes darted around, looking for anything to use as a weapon. There was nothing within arm's reach. Nothing she could grab to defend herself. Her only option was to run, to find an escape, to outsmart him. But as she turned to flee, she stumbled. Her feet caught on the edge of a carpet, sending her crashing to the floor. Pain shot through her knees and palms as she tried to steady herself. She heard Lucas's footsteps grow louder behind her, a steady rhythm that matched the rapid pounding of her pulse. "Get up," Lucas called out, his voice cold like a command. "I'm not finished with you yet." Clara scrambled to her feet, panic surging through her. She didn't dare look back again. She couldn't. If she did, she knew he would be right there, his hand outstretched to grab her. She reached the end of the hallway and rounded the corner toward the lobby, her eyes scanning desperately for anyone who could help. The lobby door was just ahead, and she could almost taste the fresh air beyond it. Almost. But as she reached the door, her fingers grasping the handle, she heard him again. The door to the lobby opened just a crack, and there he was, Lucas, standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light from inside the hotel. He was blocking her only exit. Clara's breath hitched in her throat. She had no more tricks, no more moves left. She was trapped. "Let me out!" she shouted, her voice raw with desperation. "Please!" Lucas didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his cold eyes watching her with a detached amusement. Then after a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice soft and chilling. "Why would I let you go, Clara? You were always meant to be here. This is where you belong." Clara recoiled from the words, her stomach twisting with disgust. She didn't understand. What did he mean by that? How could he say something so cold, so heartless? "Why?" she repeated, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Why me, Lucas? What did I do to deserve this?" Lucas stepped closer, his face now illuminated by the faint light of the hotel lobby. His eyes were dark, almost void of emotion, but there was a glimmer of something dangerous, something she hadn't seen before, something that chilled her to the bone. "You didn't do anything to deserve it, Clara," he said, his voice now a low growl. "You're just the next one, the next in a long line of people who thought they could escape. But no one escapes me. Not anymore." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The dread that had been building in her chest suddenly crystallized into full-blown terror. What was he saying? What did he mean by the next one? Before she could react, Lucas lunged toward her, grabbing her wrist with an iron grip. She tried to pull away, but he was too strong, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Stop!" she screamed, thrashing against his hold. "Please let go!" But Lucas didn't flinch. He simply tightened his grip, dragging her toward the center of the hallway. Clara's body slammed against the hard wall, and she gasped in pain. The wind knocked out of her. She fought to stay conscious, to remain alert, but it was becoming harder and harder. Every second, every movement felt like it was dragging her deeper into the nightmare. "Get off me!" Clara cried again, her voice hoarse. But this time, her words held more desperation. She had to do something. She had to survive. Lucas laughed softly, almost affectionately. "You'll understand soon enough, Clara. You're part of something bigger than yourself. You always were." Clara's mind reeled. What was he talking about? What kind of twisted game was this? Before she could ask another question, Lucas's other hand shot out, gripping her by the hair and yanking her head back painfully. "This is the only way," he said, his voice cold and detached. In that moment, Clara understood. This wasn't just about him or about her. It was about something far more sinister, something that had been building for years, something dark and twisted that she was only beginning to comprehend. Her heart sank as the realization hit her. Lucas was not just a lover, turned monster. He was part of something bigger, a network, an underground cult, or something more evil than she could have ever imagined, and she had unknowingly walked right into it. Lucas leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "I'm going to make this easy on you, Clara. You just have to let go. Let go and become part of the bigger picture. Don't you want to be special?" Tears stung Clara's eyes as she fought to hold on to herself. There was no easy way out of this. But one thing was clear. She couldn't allow herself to become a part of whatever this was. She wasn't going to let Lucas take her down that path, no matter what it cost her. With everything she had left, Clara twisted violently in his grip, her body filled with the raw instinct to survive. The pain shot through her like fire, but she wouldn't stop. She wouldn't let him win. The air in the hallway felt thick, suffocating, as Clara continued to struggle against Lucas's unyielding grip. Every muscle in her body screamed with pain, but adrenaline surged through her veins, urging her to fight. She couldn't let him take her, not when she was so close to finding a way out. Her heart raced, her thoughts scattered as she looked around desperately for anything that might give her a chance. But Lucas was stronger, faster. His grip on her wrist tightened, dragging her further into the darkness of the hallway, away from the light of the lobby. His cold, emotionless expression never faltered as he hauled her toward a door at the end of the corridor, one she hadn't noticed before. It was an old wooden door, weathered by time, barely noticeable in the dim light. It seemed like a place meant to be forgotten. "Please, Lucas, stop. This isn't you," Clara cried, her voice breaking with desperation. "Whatever you think you're doing, it's wrong. You don't have to do this. Let me go, and we can forget any of this ever happened." Lucas didn't answer. His face remained blank, impassive, as if her words meant nothing to him. He stopped in front of the door, turning the handle with slow deliberation. Clara tried to pull away, but it was no use. His strength was overpowering, and with a swift motion, he shoved the door open. Inside, the room was dark, the air stale and suffocating. Clara's eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light filtering through a small, grimy window near the ceiling. The room was small, sparsely furnished, and filled with an unsettling silence. There were no decorations, no warmth, just cold, empty walls and the faint smell of something metallic, something foul. It was like a tomb. "Let me go," Clara gasped, her chest tightening as the terror began to take over. "You don't want this. Whatever sick game you're playing, it ends now." Lucas stepped into the room, dragging her along with him. He pushed her toward the center of the space, where a metal chair stood ominously in the middle of the room, its legs scraping against the floor with a loud screech. Clara felt a cold sweat break out on her skin as she realized what he was going to do. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible as the horror of the situation dawned on her. "Please, no." Lucas smiled then, but it wasn't the warm smile she had once known. It was cold, cruel, and devoid of anything human. He grabbed her by the shoulders, pushing her roughly into the chair, and for the first time Clara saw something in his eyes, something that sent an icy chill down her spine. It was satisfaction. "You really thought you could leave, Clara," he said, his voice low, almost sad. "But you're not meant to. You're just another piece, just another step in the plan." "What plan?" "What are you talking about?" Clara demanded, her voice trembling as her hands struggled to free themselves from the restraints Lucas had pulled from his pocket, thin strips of cloth that now bound her to the chair. Lucas didn't answer immediately. He took a step back, his eyes scanning her as though she were some kind of specimen under a microscope. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears, and for a moment, all she could do was stare at him, trying to make sense of the nightmare that had become her reality. "I'm part of something bigger, Clara," Lucas finally said, his voice cold and detached. "Something much bigger than you and me. And now you're going to help me bring it to life." Clara's mind whirled with confusion and fear. "What are you talking about? What thing are you talking about?" Her breath caught in her throat as she realized that Lucas wasn't just a deranged lover. He was a part of something far more terrifying. This wasn't about love or desire. It was about something much darker, something that had been carefully planned, orchestrated. Lucas moved around her in slow, deliberate circles, his hands moving over various objects in the room. Clara's eyes darted to each one, but she could barely make out their details in the low light. All she knew was that she needed to escape, and she needed to do it quickly. "There's no way out for you," Lucas continued, his voice becoming almost eerily calm. "You've walked into this willingly, Clara. You were drawn to me because of what I could offer, but you didn't understand the cost. You never understood what it would take. But now you're going to be part of something greater." Clara's heart pounded harder, the reality sinking in. This wasn't just about him. It was about an organization, a cult. She thought about the strange messages he had sent her, the cryptic language he used. He had been preparing her, manipulating her for something sinister, something she had never even imagined. She tried once more to break free from her restraints, her hands shaking with fear and frustration. But it was no use. The ropes were too tight, the chair too sturdy. Panic began to set in, and her thoughts blurred as she tried to process everything. Lucas wasn't just a madman. He was part of something systematic, something that had planned every move to this point, and she had walked right into it. "Why me?" Clara cried, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and fear. "Why me, Lucas? What do you want from me?" Lucas paused, his eyes softening for the briefest moment, as if he were considering her question. Then he spoke, his voice laced with a strange, almost affectionate sadness. "You were always going to be a part of it, Clara. From the moment we met, I knew. I just had to bring you here, to this place. You and I, we were never meant to be. But this is your real purpose. And now you will be the one who helps us. You'll help bring about the new world." The new world. Clara's mind reeled. But before she could say anything more, Lucas moved behind her and produced a sharp knife from his coat pocket. The sight of it made her stomach turn, her throat constricting with terror. She didn't want to believe what he was about to do, but she could feel it in her bones. "Don't fight it," Lucas murmured as he pressed the blade lightly against her neck. "It will be over soon, and then you'll be part of the plan. You'll be free." The knife pressed harder against her skin, and Clara's heart skipped a beat. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to escape, but it was too late. She felt the cold metal at her throat, the sensation of something sharp about to slice through her, and all she could do was close her eyes and pray that somehow, somewhere, someone would hear her screams. But Lucas wasn't done. Instead of making the fatal incision, he pulled back, leaving her breathless and confused. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Not yet," Lucas said, his voice growing cold again. "You'll see. We're just getting started." Clara closed her eyes in terror. She wasn't sure if she could survive this nightmare, this madness that had unfolded. The last shred of hope she had clung to was slipping through her fingers. But deep down, she knew one thing for sure. There was no going back, and the real horror of what she had walked into was only just beginning.